let's call the meeting to order at 7:09 p.m.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. Brian, at some point, we might have to request you to, submit a letter of interest to the town council so you could become, an official member too, instead of just an honorary member.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so great to see everyone. Been a long time since last year that we had a meeting, and I know that Shane and I both got renominated, so our current terms are ending next week, and then our new terms begin. So I don't think anyone else actually applied for the positions, so there's technically still only 4 of us, which means we need 3 of the 4 to have a quorum. So that brings us over to public participation. Brian, if you want to participate now or at any time, you're welcome to.
I was gonna wait till you get down to basically item 5, I think, but I can do it whichever way you want, Dan.
Item 5 is perfectly fine.
Okay.
As you know, I try to run things as informal as possible so that people get their comments in where appropriate.
Agree.
So this brings us to item 4, minutes from November 29th. Shane took the minutes last time. Bill's taking the minutes this time. Everyone have the opportunity, at least for those on the committee, to review the minutes of the last meeting. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? Shane has made that motion. Do we have a second?
Where are the minutes? I don't know if I saw them.
I sent them in the
it's an email.
Yeah.
I see.
They're in the Dropbox link, but I sent them in email as well, just to keep things easy.
Okay. I'll just open it up real quick. Sorry.
All good.
Okay.
And thank you for doing the notes this time, William. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, I got it.
Okay, so Shane has made the motion to approve the minutes as presented. Do we have a second?
Yeah, second.
Okay, Bill seconded the motion. With that, the minutes have the date, location, statement that all votes are by roll call, the list of members present, when the meeting started, when the meeting adjourned, and the official motions themselves and a summary of the discussions. In other words, it has all of the required elements under the open meeting law for what minutes have to have. Any discussion on the minutes before you? Seeing none, we will take a vote again by roll call. It needs to be recorded as such, and the vote will be done in the order in which you appear on my screen. Bill, approval of the minutes?
Yep.
That's an affirmative. Shane?
Yep, I approve.
Approved. I voted in the affirmative as well. Unanimous approval on the minutes. Excellent. With that, I will go ahead. I'll put a statement at the bottom that they were approved as of this date. Send a copy off to Sherry Dalton to go on to the website for the actual committee, and I also send a copy off to Betsy as the town clerk, so she has a copy as the records officer for the town in case someone should request it and can't find it on the website or doesn't know where to look. She does have a copy readily available, or if something happens to the website. So those are some of the responsibilities that I've taken on, and it does not take long. It'll probably be done before this meeting is over. So with that brings us over to the substantive item that we have for tonight of 9, which is item number 5, updates on funding options for public cable access television. At our last meeting, Bill, you got nominated to be on the other committee that's appointed to also look into this issue. So
Yep.
Any updates? And Brian, I think you also want to have some updates as well.
Yeah, so I think we skipped the last meeting, but and so we're gonna have the next meeting in May, but I think as of March, we were working on a draft of recommendations for funding, if I'm remembering all that correctly.
Anything substantive of where the funding was either coming from, how it was going to be designed.
So
Yeah,
let me jump in
wait.
here if I might for a minute. Bill,
Yeah, go for it.
feel free to talk over if you want. So a couple of things. First of all, Bill's a great member of the committee. Lots of excellent contributions, been very helpful. Good representation from the Cable Advisory Committee. So thank you, Bill, for that. So I thought I'd just do a couple of things. Again, I said to Dan earlier before the meeting started that Ian would have signed on tonight, but because of schedule conflicts and holidays and everything else, the WCAT board is actually meeting tonight at the same time that you guys are meeting. So I'm basically here in his stead. I probably would have tried to sign on anyway, but so the last time we spoke, the streaming bills were in committee. They had a public hearing, and then radio silence for the most part. And as it approached the so-called Joint Rule 10 date, which was this year, February 7th, that's usually when things have to be released from committee. You can file for extensions, and those requests for extensions have to be approved by the Rules Committee, which is obviously a different committee. So just prior to February 7th, the committee asked for an extension until April the 8th, and that was granted. And then as April the 8th rolled around, they asked for one more extension. That was also granted, and the new extension date or the re-extension date is now May the 6th. So on May the 6th, it's already been decided that they're not going to extend again. So the options are committee issues a favorable report, they issue an unfavorable report, or they assign it to study, which basically kills it.
Or take no action, which would also presumably kill it.
Which would kill it. And they could suggest amendments, which would basically require a refiling, I think. So we're obviously waiting for May the 6th to see what happens. In the last couple of days, literally the last couple of days, Dave Gauthier, who is the president of Mass Access, which is the trade group for the various community cable stations, and the executive director of Winchester Cable, which is WinCam, he and another fellow from Mass Access met with Senator Lewis and I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on the chairman of the doesn't matter, but the chairman of the committee, the Senate chairman of the committee. And they met Monday with staff from a couple of offices. And things appear to be positive, but, you know, don't believe it till you see it. So to the point, so we're waiting for May 6th, basically. But to the point that Bill made, and Dan, you asked about, you know, what's this draft memo look like? One of the things that CAT is trying to incorporate is that they're not looking for handouts necessarily. They're not looking for infusions of cash. What they're looking to do is to break even. And so along those lines, I can give you information as of the end of March to give you some sense of what's transpired since this working group was formed a while ago, last June, maybe, I don't remember. But anyway, on the income side, total income year to date, again through March, is actually over budget by $33,000 and change. The bulk of that is a $20,000 capital contribution by the cable companies, which they were obligated to provide. I don't know for sure, but my sense is that there's nothing budgeted through March. So my sense is that that payment came in earlier than we expected, than WCAT expected, but nevertheless, it impacted the March financials positively for total income, which was $33,000 $100,000. The budgeted total income was a loss of just over $57,000. Included in that number, the big numbers that go into that, there had been budgeted items for health insurance for staff, which have not gone into effect because staff is either covered by a spouse or is covered by parents because of their age. So no one there now is taking health insurance. That was about just shy of $17,000 year to date. The other number, the other big number there was wages are under budget by a little bit over $17,000. And that has to do with Ryan Boyd's departure, salary reallocations around that were done, to be conservative. Some of what Ryan was making was allocated out to bump some salaries, but for the most part, those salaries are under budget and will continue to be under budget for the rest of the year. The only other number in there, which isn't quite as big as a roughly $3,800 number, and that's a change in what was budgeted for the cable franchise fees and what we've actually received for cable franchise fees. So those are those numbers. So when you get all the way down to the bottom of the income statement, total income is positive $43,000 as opposed to a budgeted loss of $48,000. So there's a swing there of about $91,000. So with that, that's I'm just trying to reinforce that what WCAT is saying is that we're not looking for necessarily an automatic amount of money every year, which some towns are already getting. They're just trying to make sure that they can do what they need to do, and if they needed to have an infusion, that there'd be some mechanism to do that. So the draft document basically goes to fewer, instead of meeting monthly, it would be probably quarterly for a while, but then no less than annually it was drafted that the town council, the town administrator, and WCAT would get together and just sort of review periodically where things stand. So that's it in a nutshell, a little bit longer than I wanted to talk, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I tried to put a couple things up, but just real quick, this thing that I'm sharing is like a draft letter, and we changed a bunch of things since then, but like we haven't had the next meeting yet. So but yeah, the general idea was that they have a way to raise more money and hopefully have some way like to have a safety net if the reserves fall too low.
Yeah, there were discussions. I think there's a subsequent one to that one, but there were some discussions about, charging for different things, actually charging town groups for different things. And those, I think, again, I got to be careful speaking for WCAT because I'm not on the board, but there's a sense that they really didn't want to do that if they didn't have to, for a couple of reasons. One, and these are in no particular order of importance, but you'd obviously have to go into some negotiations, and just picking an example of graduation, for example, because Dan and I were talking about this earlier, that they would say, this is what it would cost to do graduation if we did it at cost. They'd prefer not to do those things. They've been doing graduations forever. Again, the goal is not to make a huge amount of money. It's just to be able to break even, to continue to do the things that they've been doing the way they've been doing them. Now, one thing I will say about the streaming bills, and one of the big concerns is that there are two big concerns, actually. The first one is the appearance that it's a tax on the streamers. And the second one is that the streaming companies are saying that this would be a windfall for local access stations, which is not true. And it's difficult for them to make that argument since they don't release any financial information because they don't have to at this point. But the tax issue, and again, this is mostly my opinion, but I believe it to be true anyway. The tax issue would be if the town was going to allocate funds to WCAT on a regular basis, no matter how they did it, it would have to go through the town budget. That in effect would also be a tax, and it would be a tax whether you had cable, whether you had streaming, or you didn't have either one. It's just part of it would be part of the town budget. So we're trying to convey those concepts to the committee, to the joint committee, and work from that. Unfortunately, you may not remember this, so I'll just go through it quickly. The way this was allocated was 5% of gross revenues from the streamers. 20% of that would go to the state's general fund. I got to believe the state can use whatever money they can get at this point, the way their budgets have been going. So 20% is better than what they have right now. So they haven't taken an active position. More importantly, the municipalities would get the same percentage as the cable companies, and that'd be 40%. Now, Wakefield's town government has been actively supporting this in a variety of ways. That's not true for the vast majority of the other communities that have cable access stations. And there's about 260. There's some stations that represent more than one city or town. So Rep Machino, who's the House sponsor, met with MMA about a month or so ago to talk about that, to say it's important for MMA to get the municipalities to say, you know, this is money that you would have that you don't have now. And again, looking at town budgets, city budgets, obviously the general fund, why people that have a chance to get some money that's not a huge burden, one would think, on the streaming companies, and not take any action is I don't understand it. So anyway, sorry about the length of time here.
Yeah, I think the one other thing I'd add is, they mentioned, if a corporation or whatnot wants to use the WCAT resources, they pay a fairly small fee and they get access to it almost whenever they want. And so the question is like, are we charging a fair amount to those types of folks as well?
Yeah, most of the people that come in are, a lot of them are nonprofits. They pay a membership fee, and for that they get certain benefits. But if we have to do, again, a quick example of that, and this is not a big issue, but just as an example, with the construction going on at the high school now, and a little bit different than what was anticipated as far as access to the studio, the Wakefield Alliance Against Violence won't be able to meet at the studio anymore. So they're going to meet off-site. WCAT is going to accommodate that, obviously. Those meetings don't get recorded for obvious reasons, I guess. But so there's no charge for them for that. And we try to do the same things, the Friends of Lake Quantipout, if they need something, we try not, we generally don't charge for services. That's what we're there to do. There's government meetings, public meetings, and whatever the school does on the school side of it for the education stuff. So the intent has always been to be a good nonprofit citizen. I think that's what they've been doing.
Agreed.
So I thank for the update. Bill, anything to add to that? Since you're on the joint committee? Before I ask
Is joint committee the working group, or is that
the working group? The working group.
Yeah, I think that captures most of the stuff going on. We spent a good bit of time like talking with the budget and like understanding what's going on with that and all the financials. And so I think we spent maybe 2 to 3 meetings doing just that.
Right.
And then from there we sort of talked about like funding and the proposal. And so so really probably like, I guess May is when we're going to see like the next draft of the proposal and probably vote on it.
One thing that is pending is the build out of the new studio, and CAT is using a figure that they'll take from their reserves of roughly $260,000 to build out what they need to build out. Um, but as Bill says, I think there was just some confusion. We were supposed to meet in March, and for a variety of reasons, I think maybe because of how cumbersome town meeting is going to be, this session specifically, I think it got bumped, so we are meeting in May. But that kind of major expense is something that CAT is looking to do. So
Yeah, and I think for the new high school bit, they are getting, the space they need, but they've still got to go build, out, other pieces of it. And so they're just trying to figure out like how they can, minimize the cost of moving over there, and what stuff they're going to need to buy, and whether or not they keep with the old stuff. And so like it's unclear if the amount that they propose from the reserves is really going to match up, but I don't think they're really going to know until they move in.
agreed.
And I guess as far as the funding, do they know where they'll get the funding? Do they have enough for that?
They have reserves of, I gotta be careful here they do have, hold on just a second, sorry.
So while you're looking that up, I'm hearing some things that are creative. That's welcome news, just because the classic funding source is continuing to dry up.
Right.
A couple of things that come to mind. First is on funding. Should the funding bill go through the State House, then, and there's 80% of a surcharge or whatever we want to call it, that there's money that comes in, 80% of which goes towards cable oriented, or for lack of a better term, cable oriented services. It sounds like that actually has to solve the needs of what we currently call in the existing framework PEG, public educational and governmental use. Right now, those are divided 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of all funding. So the schools actually get 1/3 of the funding that comes in. 2/3 goes effectively to CAT. And what I haven't heard is what's going to happen on the educational side, because the educational side doesn't really deal with CAT so much. And will there still be funding so that we have educational services available specifically for the high school students and some middle school students to keep the flow of people who have the expertise, the training, the passion of delivering community services still going into the field, because that's part of the reason why the educational piece has been there. And I haven't heard anything of that. Do you know if that's been a part of the discussions?
It has not been. I will say that originally, when the working group was formed, there had been a slot for the school department. That slot, for whatever reason, there were going to be 9 people, I think. That slot wasn't fit.
Okay.
And Bill, unless I've missed something, there's been no discussion about what might happen with the education component of that.
Yeah, I mean, I missed one meeting, but I don't recall hearing anything.
So I will certainly recommend that we put that discussion on the agenda for the May meeting.
And a couple of ways that it may be able to be handled, because there's been a historic collaboration, and there will continue to be a collaboration between the high school and CAT locally, but the funding issue will become more dominant, especially for the educational side, because that was used to actually pay staffing salaries and so forth over at the high school, to at least pay part of that componentry for the television programming that was done. It wasn't so much the club programming, but the actual educational classes. So that's something that I view as pretty important in figuring that part out. Given the current political climate, and this is a very present issue, I would make sure that any discussions that happen get memorialized with very clear expectations, so that the anything that is deemed in agreement with the district, the Wakefield Public School District, is documented well, so that that can be memorialized and passed on going forward. Similarly for CAT, so that we have the ability to carry the purposes forward regardless of who happens to be in the roles. But the educational side was one of the pieces where I looked and said, I can see why the State House would divide that piece up to make sure that the educational side still gets funding. Wakefield is a bit unusual in that it has a very close relationship with CAT, and that it utilizes a lot of services from CAT directly, not just an occasional meeting, but it does it for lots of meetings. This meeting, for example, will be posted most likely by CAT. They're a part of that workflow. So there's a variety of different pieces that come into play. And that's something that I think is definitely worthwhile. The other piece that I have not heard that, again, is directly relates to this committee's work is the capital infusions. That's something that what has been historically a part of the contracts, whether it was $100,000, $300,000, those are numbers that have actually happened in Wakefield in prior contracts, or $15,000, $50,000, or nothing. And all of those are numbers that have happened. That's where capital equipment purchases, usually over the course of 10 or 15 years, got budgeted. And I'm not hearing that there is a budget process for that. And if there is not an expectation for regular capital infusions, I'd recommend that at least a portion of the budget be deemed the nonprofit equivalent of what in the municipal world we call an enterprise fund. An enterprise fund is funds that are used for a specific purpose, raised and used for a specific purpose, and can roll over from year to year. And so because the issue with the usage of capital funds for an organization like CAT is that the usage tends to be very lumpy from an accounting perspective. So the equipment purchases tend to be expensive but irregular. And so you may have a year where you have $15,000 in capital purchases. You may have a year where you have $50,000 in capital purchases, and then you may have a year where it's $3,000. So that it becomes hard to budget on an annualized basis. But if you have a consistent amount of, say, $10,000, I'm just picking out a random number here.
Well, so if you take a look at the thing I'm sharing, like there's the capital reserve forecast here.
The capital reserve is very separate from.
Yeah.
Capital reserve is.
But if you look at the line for contractual capital funding, like you can see, like they're getting like 41,667, 41,667 for next year, and then there's like a cliff, and I don't remember if that was because of the contract renegotiation or what it is, but like the amounts that they've gotten for capital funding have gone down over time.
Right, and eventually will go away. I mean, those accounts can't be commingled either. There are separate accounts for operating the regular franchise fees, and there are separate accounts for capital. So you can't commingle them.
And that's part of the reason why I'm mentioning that it may be worthwhile to create a fund that is specific for capital expenses, that is separate from reserves and other funds, so that it can be designated based upon actual, at this point, historical trends, and it's probably based on a 20-year cycle. So the total cost of what would be needed over the course of 20 years, and that would That way you could actually budget it and you could use it as needed. So it should always have a positive balance.
Yeah,
And
I think that's just a tricky topic because like a 20-year cycle is difficult for them to do with just like the technology cycles and then the speed at which things like wear out. And so like one example that was given was that right now they're sort of on the cusp of like a whole bunch of different technologies for broadcasting. And the question there is, well, which one are they going to use and which one like is going to be obsolete? And to interact with the cable companies, they require certain things. And so, those ones like just creep up on them. And a lot of the technology is changing quickly. So that it's difficult for them, at least over a 20-year cycle, to figure out like what they're actually going to spend. Even though like, there have been some trends historically.
you have to go by the trends. And that's the reason why I'm mentioning this is that we're dealing with an intersection of municipal finance to some degree and nonprofit finance, which does not need to mirror actual reality for right now and the next short term. But to say, okay, over the course of 20 years, there's an expectation that it's going to cost $1.2 million. Doesn't mean you have 1.2 million to spend now. It means that the expectation is that over the course of 20 years, that's what's likely to be for the cost to be. That can be reevaluated, and I would expect it to be reevaluated probably about every 5 years. Because it may be that, okay, due to technology and affinity changes, there is a need for a different sort of technology. It may be that number goes up, it may be that number goes down. If we were to go back, say, 5 years ago, things were looking very different than they are now. There was much higher focus, particularly on podcasts specifically, and there was almost no focus on streaming things such as meetings. People weren't interested in doing Zoom and Teams and other forms of this type of meeting. It was pretty much uniformly rejected within Wakefield 5 years ago. And then, of course, we know what happened approximately 4 years ago, that the world changed. So I'm mentioning that because while you're not going to get specifics, you can have an idea of, okay, so we're going to need some sort of cameras. Do we know what type of cameras they'll be? Not at all. But if the historical cost of cameras has been around, say, $15,000 each, and that number is probably relatively static over time, just the way that technology tends to operate. You can then budget that you might need, over the course of 20 years, you might need, say, 8 cameras because of the useful lifespan, plus to have spares, emergencies, different types of cameras, some that are fixed, some that are portable. Do you know what they're actually going to cost? No, it's always a guess. But to have it so that the lumpiness of a capital budget is removed, because as I see it in this type of model, you won't have much success going to what we call the capital planning committee in Wakefield. They would not be receptive to money for a nonprofit that's affiliated with the town. Whereas if it's built into an operating budget, that there's so much money that automatically gets set aside, that money is there and it's in a different account. It doesn't show up as a part of the general net income. It will on a strict cash basis, but even then it can go into an accrued componentry. If you think about it from a personal perspective, it's very much like an escrow of a mortgage. The escrow account is separate from the primary mortgage account. You have the ability to see it and see the transactions, but it is separate from everything else. And the amount does get reevaluated in that case every year. Brian knows more about that than he probably ever wanted to, given his prior career. But in terms of having the amount set aside over a longer period of time, I would probably use approximately 20 years for this type of field, because you want to choose the longest expected life of any equipment that you have. And some equipment and I'm thinking about things like screens and so forth, would have a useful life anticipated of about 20 years. A screen might cost $3,000 or $4,000. In and of itself, that's not all that significant, but you want to have those documented. Things like wiring probably have a useful life of about 20 years. And then you actually will have to do some new wiring. Do we know what type of wiring they're going to need? No. But would we use, say, as an example, Cat5 wiring in the new high school? I certainly hope that you have someone who's actually looking for at least the CAT version, that they're not using Cat5 wiring, that they're using Cat7 so that you are future-proofing things. Cat7 costs more. It's probably not going to be built into the budgeting and components unless it is otherwise known about. So, and I'm giving that as real examples because Cat5 is very inexpensive to buy by the bundle. It does not meet the data needs that a studio would have. Cat 6, which is the most common current standard, probably would. Cat 7 is the standard that has emerged that is even tighter. The difference between these physically, if you were to look at the wires, you probably wouldn't notice the difference, but the difference is how the wires behave with high speed data, what we currently call high speed. And it has to last realistically probably 20 years. The building is probably going to have an expected useful life of around 50 years. So that's the reason why I'm suggesting that it may be useful to have, again, what we would call an enterprise fund. So if you look at the budget that we're going to be discussing on Monday at town meeting, you'll see there are enterprise funds for water and sewer. Those are funds that roll over from year to year to handle the big expenses, because water and sewer is a similar type of heavy infrastructure for an ongoing service. We don't pay very much for water, but the infrastructure is very expensive upfront. Similarly for CAT. The other piece that I just want to mention that, and you touched upon it, both Bill and Brian in your presentation, is the idea of doing chargebacks. Professionally, I've been in the IT industry for many years, and chargebacks are relatively common in that industry. They're also pretty uniformly reviled when they have to get charged back to a user group that isn't used to receiving them. So if it's just an accounting game, that's one thing. I think in this case, where so much of our government is run by individuals who have a consumer mindset, anything that resembles a chargeback, that feels like a chargeback, that looks like a chargeback, they're going to look at from a consumer perspective of, well, if it's going to cost us the equivalent of $100 to have a meeting recorded, let's just not have the meeting recorded. Let's save the town $100. And that's not a discussion we want people to have. A business perspective, we would look at that and probably say, it's only $100 out of a $100 million budget. It's well worth it to have the access for the public. But the perspective of many people in government is that of a consumer first, because they may or may not have that corporate perspective, let alone the corporate experience, to understand the relative scope. So I'd avoid doing that chargeback, with one notable exception that CAT has been very good about, which is using it to show its value. At the annual meetings and so forth, it shows its value largely through what is the value that it brings to the town. It might be 1.7 million, $2 million of what the cost would have been. I think that part can be valuable, but I think it's incredibly important that not be broken out by, okay, this is how much was done for the school department, or this is how much was done for the recreation services. Because as soon as you allow a breakout of that, people will then start to want to make choices. And we don't want to give a menu that, oh, well, we want to charge people for athletic events. Whether CAT wants to do things for nonprofits or certain nonprofits at no cost is separate from anything that is public educational, as in part of the Wakefield public schools, or government related. So the things that are directly required under the funding, I would keep as one lump. Anything else becomes open for discussion. I leave it to the board of directors to make that call. So that's just my 2 cents on how things, on some of the input for how to handle some of the money factors. Otherwise, the idea of doing a financial surcharge, tax, whatever we want to call it, on streaming types of services for that revenue and use that as a source for it, I think makes a lot of sense if we can get it approved by the state. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
No, thank you for explaining. No, that's good to know.
Brian, it looks like you might have some fun discussions with Ian.
Possibly. Oh, it'll come up with the working group for sure.
So excellent. And Eric, you joined us at around 7:40. So Bill, if you can record that in the minutes that Eric joined.
Yeah, I got it.
Excellent. So Eric, we are on item number 5 in the agenda, if you're able to unmute and be a part of the discussion. So any other parts of the discussion that you think may be relevant, anything that you'd like input in from the committee as it relates to the funding options?
Yeah, I don't know what Bill thinks. I mean, I think that document is a work in progress. I don't think there's any definites yet. There was a draft. That draft was redrafted, is up for discussion, but we haven't met since the redraft has been done. So the committee hasn't really taken any action on that one way or the other.
So one thing that I think is maybe worth looking at is how town meeting on Monday is at the end, when we get to the unclassified section, which is where CAT is embedded into the budget, to see if there's any discussion. Last year, there was none. And I found it to be really interesting because it was brought up briefly in the presentation that it was there. I'm hoping that there is similarly no more focus put onto it than, unless someone has a question. If someone has a question, by all means, I think we should delve into it. But otherwise, I think that including it as a part of the unclassified funding allows for it to be very transparent that there is a cost to the town for having the services that CAT provides. And you'll note that my language here is very specific. I'm not talking about money for CAT itself. It's money for the services that CAT provides, because I view WCAT itself as a nonprofit, as a vendor. And so it's one that could be theoretically swapped with another vendor who provides the same thing. I don't see that happening anytime soon, because CAT does a really good job and it makes a lot of sense to have it. But it is independent. It's not actually a part of the government itself, which I don't have a problem with. But I look at this and I think having to have it understated has it out in the open for anyone who wants to look. Most people, I think, would rather not look. And as long as the number doesn't seem problematic, and I haven't heard from FinCom or anyone else that it is, I think it's best left quiet. It's similar to other expenses that the town has that people really don't say much about. They don't say much about how much gets spent on trees or how much gets spent on doing power washing of the town of the town municipal buildings. It's a service that just gets done, or how much gets spent on redoing road signs. because those all have to be custom made. CAT provides a custom service, and I think it does a really good job of it. So that's my 2 cents, but and I think that from a funding perspective, to not put any more emphasis on it is probably helpful. So
Yeah, I
others,
agree. I agree.
others thoughts?
Yeah, I don't
Any-
have anything to add.
Anything else on the updates for the funding options? Otherwise, it is a part of article number 1, which is the first article that will be discussed on Monday. And CAT of course will of course be there streaming the meeting. And the meeting is expected to go on to at least 2 nights. So if you have the ability to be there, it is requested. All town leaders are asked to be at the meeting. The only people who are required to be there are chairs of committees that may be called. Okay, with that, item number 6, next meeting dates. So, and Eric, we did discuss how Shane and I actually were renominated for this committee. So our current terms end next week, and then we start a new 3-year term that begins on May 1st. So next meeting date I would anticipate will be in the next term period. Any suggestions? We are not in a contract. We've not been asked to look at any contracts by the town council that I'm aware of. So I don't see anything urgently pending. So any thoughts on when a meeting is? Otherwise, I would suggest that we again go with about 6 months to get further updates. And if there is a reason for a meeting before then, by all means, anyone can contact Jared and request it.
Yeah, again, I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah, because we met November last year. I don't know if we want to do November, maybe October. I don't know if. I'm just trying to do is 6 months November?
6 months would be October. It's a matter of do we want to do it before or after the next town meeting?
Right.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion. When is the next town meeting?
The next town meeting is likely to be, realistically, I'm expecting that they'll probably call it for November 18th.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I
it's good
mean-
to do it before the town meeting, but again, that's just my personal feeling. We can do whatever works best.
The October sounds good then.
So maybe a late October.
Yeah, like the 22nd before daylight savings time flips over.
Let me let me just open my
Whatever.
calendar. Give me 1 sec.
Thursdays tend to work well without conflicts with other meetings. Most meetings tend to happen on Monday, so that's why I'm looking
24th.
forward to it.
Sounds
20
good.
So October 24th, 1 week before Halloween festivities.
Yep.
October
Everyone can come in costume. Brian can come dressed up as Ian.
October 24th works, yes, and 7 p.m. again. This works too.
Any objections? Eric?
Get in now.
Well, I might have suggested after the national election. But still. Earlier, have been years trying to get a more accurate description of all these numbers in the annual town report, but I yield to what the chairman said. And don't push anything. It's just I'm there, you have to be persuaded to be silent or conform. Okay?
Dan, I apologize. I have to get off. I have a commitment, so.
Okay.
Thanks,
you for
everyone.
joining- Thank you for
Thank
joining
you
us,
for the
Brian.
updates.
See you
Thanks,
guys.
Brian.
Thanks.
Okay, so it sounds like we can all meet on October 24th, at least tentatively. I'm
Yes,
just going to pull up to make sure that I don't have any conflicts that I know of. Okay. I don't think that that's going to cause any major conflicts. If there is, we'll know closer to that time. There is a Jewish holiday on that begins that night, but I don't think that it will present a particular problem. So that night is the beginning of Simchat Torah. Is it's also the end of Sukkot, but I don't again see that as being a problem for this committee at this time. So if you're wondering, I use time and date, timeanddate.com. They allow you to look at all the holidays, and they've got a variety of different holidays and so forth that are listed for different states, along with many different cultural experiences and many different religions as well.
was not aware of that website. There you go.
So,
Timeanddate.com. Okay,
correct.
good to know.
And you'll see that there's a holiday of some sort almost every day.
Nice.
It does miss a few every once in a while. So, for example, on Saturday, May 4th, it is listed that it's Orthodox Holy Saturday, and then that's also Kentucky Derby, Rhode Island Independence Day, but it's missing one of the most important holidays that happens on May 4th.
Is that your birthday, Dan?
It is not. It is International Star Wars Day.
Oh, that's right. May the
May the
4th.
4th be with you.
Yeah, how could they miss that?
I don't know, but they did. So one never knows. They've got May 5th, Cinco de Mayo,
Yeah.
but it's just sometimes they miss
That's
things.
it. I'm not using it. If they miss that, I'm not using
Okay,
it.
so bring this over to item 7, election of chair. So under our bylaws, since we're a standing committee, annually we have to have an election of a chair at the first meeting after the annual election. And so
Okay.
this is the first meeting after the annual town election of officers. So that's the reason why it's on the agenda for tonight. If we weren't to do it, it would then have to go on to the next meeting, and it can be deferred just because of the way the terms go. But because of the practicality, where in this particular case, the terms, isn't a change of personnel, I don't have a problem with doing the election of chair. So the responsibilities of the chair is to call meetings, run the meetings, handle the interactions with the town administrator's office, town clerk's office, and then also interact with members of the public and other interested parties for anything that comes up. So those are the core requirements. It does not take a large amount of time. The there's no real prestige behind doing it for this committee, or really any other in town that I'm aware of significance. There is an email address and so forth that gets used, which you've seen. So there's access to the town's ancient email system for that as well. But that's really the only core responsibilities. It's also where the communications from the town come through. So an example is when the reminders come through for the annual reports that Eric was talking about. And there is a filing, Eric, for the annual report. There was one made. And so those come through to the general email. The chair is responsible for making sure that it gets sold out and done. And so we did that in November, and that got submitted. So we actually have those pieces. If anyone would like to take on the role of chair, happy to have anyone take that on. If no one wants to do it, I have no problems continuing in the role, but I'm not angling that I have any sort of need to do so. So if someone wants to take it on, I also can assist anyone else who wants to take it on, and again, happy to do so. I've been doing this for a number of years, and happy to have other people take over the roles and do transitions, because I've been on the committee now for about 20 years. Just it's been a long time. And so that's where I want to make sure that while I have a lot of institutional memory, that's the reason that I stay on the committee, is so that part doesn't get lost very readily. I also want to make sure that over time, other people can continue the work of the committee as well.
So I'll be direct, Dan. I think you're doing a fantastic job. I would love to have you continue to do it. I don't feel comfortable yet enough where I know enough. I don't feel that I could come anywhere near filling your shoes at this stage. That may change in the future, but right now I still just don't feel super knowledgeable. I guess I've only been doing it for a little over a year. That's just my feeling, but others may feel otherwise.
Bill, Eric, thoughts?
Well, I was 3 times chairman of the advisory committee to the Board of Selectmen, going from 73 to 99. And when Warner Cable went away and with the replacements, and they have new ones in, I didn't need my institutional memory with the cable company, so I resigned. And I'm 88 now and showing it. I'm acting my age, as you may have noticed. And so I'm happy with what you're doing, Dan. Yeah, it's very good.
Appreciate those comments. And you don't look a day over 68.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have plenty on my plate, I think, with the working group, so I'm not going to volunteer for more things right now.
Okay, I can go with that, and I do appreciate you being a part of the working group, Bill, and putting all of that additional time in. With that, what I am hearing is that at some point, Shane, you may have interest in taking it over, and happy to share the knowledge that I have in the process, so that you feel more comfortable. There's always a learning curve.
Sure.
And the way that I do things isn't necessarily the right way. It is just a way that works. Every chair has their own style, which
Sure.
I greatly appreciate. And as long as things get done in a reasonable way, that's transparent, that respects the role of the committee, respects the role of the government, I think that that's really what we're all after. So it's not that things have to be done the way that I'm doing them, because it's certainly not perfect. It's just a matter of, it's one way to get things done.
Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely. I think you do a stellar job, Dan, so thank you. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, like I say, it may be something we could look at later as well. Like yourself, I'm on other committees as well, so I just try not to get myself too thin. I did add a third committee this time around also, so I'm, trying to give a little back to the town, which is good.
It always good. I serve with Eric on another committee. Bill, we know, is on another committee, so having people do double duty, triple duty, and so forth, definitely helpful. So with that, we do have to have an actual election of the chairs. So we need a nomination.
So
Yeah, I nominate Daniel.
I second that.
Okay, so Bill's made the nomination. Shane is seconded. Any discussion? Going once, going twice. Okay, take the vote in the order in which you appear on my screen. Bill,
Aye.
Shane,
I,
Eric,
Yes.
and I'll vote in the affirmative, so we have a unanimous vote. Thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence as well. And look forward to passing the proverbial baton. Maybe it's a pen in a year or so. And again, if you want to take it on before then, we can always add it to any agenda that is built into the bylaws. So that ability is there. Brings us over to item 8, open items, any unanticipated items.
no, I don't think we do. I thought what was interesting, again, I was unaware, which, I don't know if we would be able to get more information. You said how a third goes to the school. I mean, how would we get more information, right? You said 2/3 goes to CATV and then a third goes to school. How would we get more information on that piece, I guess?
You can request a copy of the contracts themselves, the cable television contracts. There are 3 of them, and it's embedded into those. So the enabling legislation that allows for the taxation, the surcharge, if you will, that actually designates the breakout of a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of the
Right.
amounts that are gathered.
So do we know what that third was that the school got or what they're going to get?
It's a matter. It's a third of the receipts
Gotcha. Okay.
that are designated for the cable access surcharges. So it's based upon the cable television receipts, which is separate from streaming, and so that's a continually decreasing pool of money.
Right. Okay.
But yes, you'll sometimes hear the phrase PEG funding, PEG, which is the acronym for Public Educational and Governmental Services.
Gotcha.
And that historically, the way that these contracts were written is that they were done with periodic, occasional influxes of capital. So it could be $50,000 after year 1, $50,000 in year 5, $50,000 in year 10. And again, of whatever that capital total is, 2/3 goes to governmental and public, 1/3 goes to educational, and similarly with the other receipts as well.
Okay.
And the concept of that, I tend to support what it is used for, which is why you heard the comments earlier. I want to make sure that we don't lose the educational piece.
Correct.
Because it's been not so much a source of pride, but a source of enlightenment for students to really get exposure to a technical part of a technical part of an industry that they otherwise wouldn't see,
Right.
and
That's
they
the
may
old one.
not see in college or other places.
Right.
I know personally, I was exposed to it at a fairly young age, and my high school didn't actually have television per se. Other schools that I attended did, and it was really very valuable. And I've attended the courses from CAT and so forth here locally, and they're very good. But the inspiration that I had from learning very young has become very helpful, so that even now, for the streaming that I do professionally, I found it to be very helpful. And I think that it's important that the youth today have those opportunities.
Right.
And
I
and it can be done, I think, in conjunction with CAT. it just has to be formalized and memorialized because people change in both sides of things.
Yeah, so something I find kind of interesting is if you go look at the streaming bill, like I pulled the wrong year because it looks like they just refile it in the same text, but it looks like essentially they don't specify how it's used, just that the municipality that takes the money has to establish this, PEG fund, and then it can only be used to support PEG things, but it doesn't really, allocate how it's done.
In this bill, I think that it's
the
done
current
in
bill,
the
yeah.
other in the other parts of the existing law.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer, but the way that bills I've seen bills run is that they're modifying existing laws, and so you have to look at the modifications in the context of the law itself.
Yeah, that's fair.
See, Daniel, who else knows these things? I think, yeah, this is great. Dan's gonna be chair for a while.
Approximately 12 months. And Eric has seen his share of things too. Fully confident of that.
I did have a question, perhaps relevant.
Sure.
Do we know how well the cable companies are doing overall? Do we get statements of that kind of thing? I imagine one cable company has few subscribers, but they got subscribers so they could supply internet.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that like these cable companies are doing pretty well, but they're selling digital services. And where it gets really weird is, let's say I'm a cable company and I sell you cable internet, and then I give you a streaming box to stream the cable over your internet connection. That
Right.
doesn't count for any of these funds. And I think they also said something to the effect of if you start with internet and you add TV, it's treated differently than if you have TV and you add internet. One gets the fund and the other doesn't. And so there's all these like weird loopholes for them to not pay it.
Wow.
Well, you say they approached us because they want to supply cable. And so just putting up all the hardware, the cables and the boxes and so on, that's what to do it, been able to do that, they had to supply the funds for public access.
Yeah,
And
I
I'm not
think
going to go
it's
further on that because I made my point.
yeah, I think it's sad that, it's the same physical cable, the same like frequencies of the signals going over this piece of copper, but we've
Yeah.
arbitrarily defined it in such a way that these signals going over this piece of copper get the funding, but those signals don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. That's exactly right. On a related note, and then I think we'll go for adjournment. Fairly late breaking news, but related to this, net neutrality rules were actually just voted on by the FCC and voted back into effect. And that the reason why I'm mentioning that is net neutrality means that the cable companies are prohibited from doing throttling or beneficiary routing for particular companies based upon money. So they have to treat all of the internet traffic uniformly. And that's a fairly significant change. It's been very contentious as the cable companies have been really, or the broadband access companies have been really fighting that because they don't want the net neutrality. They want to be able to get new revenue streams by having segmentation. And what the arguments, and if you follow this, you'll hear is that it's not about them slowing things down, which sounds accurate, is that they won't speed things up. And the world is constantly getting faster. That has been a constant in technology. And if you have something at a current speed, in 5, 10, 15 years, it will feel very slow. If we go back to say 15 years ago and the internet speed that you had back then, you may have still been 15 years ago, you may have still been on dial-up. Or you may have had a small, slow connection. It may have been a 10 or 20 meg connection to wherever you are. Actually, going back 15 years ago, we were talking about T1 lines, which are 1.5 megabits per second.
1.544.
Correct.
Because it's
And
based on the number of voice circuits that you put on those things.
correct. And if we still had to operate that way, it would not be acceptable by today's standards.
No.
So that's the reason why things such as net neutrality fall into this area of interest. But otherwise, very helpful. We will meet again in October. Hopefully there will be more updates and we'll be able to continue the discussions. If anything else comes up in the meantime, please by all means, let me know. Eric, to your point, as to the number of subscribers and things like that, that's something that can be requested of the cable companies. They do not have to provide to the town the number of total subscribers, only the number of cable television subscribers, which they do provide. And it's very, very minimal. As of last year, as an example, RCN had less than 100 cable television subscribers. And they have a lot of internet subscribers, but very few who are actually getting cable television. My discussions with cable television providers is that they make almost no money on them. So there's no money in keeping that piece of their business alive. They're just soon people switch over to streaming where they can actually make more money.
Thank you for mentioning that point.
So anything else, or do we have a motion to adjourn?
I give a motion to adjourn.
So Shane's made a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Eric is seconding the motion to adjourn. He wants to leave. He wants to go home. He wants to get out of the library, or at least out of that area of the library.
Yeah.
So with that, we're going to take any discussion. Otherwise, we'll take a vote on the motion to adjourn in the order in which you appear on my screen. Bill,
Yep. I.
Shane,
Eric,
Yes.
and I will vote in the affirmative. So we have yet again another unanimous vote. Meeting is adjourned at 8:21.